I think there is a minimal size, but I like to think of them more as shapes. So whenever I'm designing a logo, I think of like squares and I think of circles. I don't think of small and minimal. I think of like, how will this work in a square? How will this work in a circle? Because if you think of favicons or social media profiles or Twitter profiles or LinkedIn profiles or whatever, headers on your website, yada, yada, yada. You're often talking that a logo needs to fit somewhere in a shape like this.
Hi everyone, welcome to Design Draws, where we interview the most forward-thinking and innovative creators on the planet to inspire and help you to reach your full creative potential. In this episode, I chat with James Martin, founder of Made by James and co-founder of BabyGiant Design. He's based in the UK, focusing on crafting outstanding brand design that have been winning many design awards. We talk about how to productize or let's say systemize your creative design process and how a designer can do that in order to scale their services and make that more efficient and actually have a service and process that you can reuse with multiple partners and become really good at it. We also learn about what makes a great logo and how designers can push forward brands with the right brand design, which kind of opportunities getting created with a great brand design for businesses. I hope you enjoy the episode. All right, so I'm here with James Martin. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you inviting me along. Although you thought I was American when I'm actually English. So I didn't want you to get away with that. So just thought I'd drop that in there to start off.
Yeah, sure. I think this was due to the introduction that was coming from Michael, who was also in the past episodes. We had a really good chat on, the creative process and more on the business side. And I think with you, I think we're going to jump more into sort of the creative process in the episode. We're looking forward to learn about your way of communicating design to stakeholders. So you're a logo designer, but you're going to talk a little bit more about yourself in the next minutes. And sort of like how that process work and how the client relationship work and your creative process. So looking forward to that. But I think, James, in your own words, maybe you can just give the audience a bit of context about yourself. You have a lot of experience in brand communication, logo design for getting that for many years, and I think it would be great to get more insights for the audience.
For anybody that doesn't know me, which is probably a lot of people, I haven't got a big fan base in Germany. Do you know what I mean? So, but basically, my name is James Martin. I've been in the design world for over 17 years now, within the design industry. But over the last, I would say, I think it's close to 7 years, I have niched, focused down into brand identity and logo design. And that is my full-time gig now. I glad to call myself, because I do like to educate and help the other creatives of this world as well through Instagram and all the rest of it under like Made by James. So I kind of like to say I build powerful brands, but I also build confidence in creators. That's kind of where my kind of balance is. But yeah, for the sake of this podcast, I can be James Martin, brand identity designer, and we can go with that. Yeah, because process is everything. I think process ultimately is the key to success. I think it's the key to profit. I think it's the key to sleeping at night. If creatives could nail their process, they would be very happy. I think that's why a lot of creators or creatives struggle. I don't like to generalize too much, but I think from chatting to many thousands of creatives over the last 7 years, there has definitely been an issue, and that issue is generally around lack of process, I would suggest, because there's so many processes within processes. Do you know what I mean? So it'd be interesting to chat about it.
Oh yeah, and that's a great topic because I mean, like the process, I mean, like you have to systemize it at the same time. You have to wiggle it and like change it depending on like who you talk to and like what are the client's needs. And so growing with that requires some design maturity, right? And then that comes with experience to understand like, okay, like, with this type of client or with this type of project, we need to have a bit more of that, a bit more benchmarking, a bit more of trend research, etc. or more time for the ideation. So I think totally agree. And this is, I think difficult, specifically for people that are, starting out to kind of understand like how you can do it. It also helps the other side to understand what they're gonna go to and what they can expect, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I would actually suggest that your process doesn't change for depending on the client. I think that is also, I think that's the problem that some creatives do have, is that they change their process depending on the client, which means that they actually become not as proactive as they should be. I mean, obviously, yeah, if somebody's coming in for a web project and somebody's coming in for a logo project, the processes are different. But if anybody comes in for a logo project, they all follow the same process. They all follow
yeah,
the
yeah.
same set of rules, the same process. Because I think that's how you become efficient in something, is
100%,
by
100%.
repeat, rinse and
Yeah.
repeat, as they say.
Exactly. That's how you become efficient, and you can build your processes, etc. I was referring more to sort of like different client needs, but I'm totally
Yeah.
agreeing. Like
Yeah.
if it's about a certain outcome that you kind of are asked for, then that totally makes sense to really systemize that process. That's how you become efficient. That's where you can build templates. That's where you can build like processes, documentation, and really become efficient. I think that's sort of the
Yeah.
key.
I think the biggest struggle is having to change. Before, I would change my personality based on the client, because some people are quite loud and jovial and fun. Some people are not. Do you know what I mean? And you do have to change how you approach some clients, I think, when it comes to like your character. Because I'm quite outspoken. I don't really, I swear a lot, which is not always good when it comes to clients, curse or whatever you call it. But yeah, I think maybe that's one thing that definitely does have to be tweaked, is you have to kind of read your client quite a lot. So for somebody who's a bit more quiet and a bit more shy, maybe you are a little bit softer with them. Somebody who is a bit louder and a bit more excitable, you can be a bit more loud and excitable. I think, as you said, like being able to read the client is an important trait, I think, or skill that designers should definitely learn.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and that's sort of actually it's a hardcore sales skill as well. I mean, like it's
Yeah,
called this, salespeople call it mirroring, for example, right? So
yeah,
you basically, you if you're trying to sell something to someone wearing a suit, well, I'm not so sure if you need to wear one, but I think you should kind of like think a little bit about like always the context that who are you talking to, and sort of like people like to talk to like-minded people. I think that's
they
just the
do.
thing, or
Yeah, I
at
think
least
that.
like people that can at least understand them. I think
Yeah, I
at least
think, yeah,
that's
people
better.
like to. I think, yeah, people generally like to feel comfortable around other people,
Yeah.
and I don't think necessarily we need to like totally change who we are, but I think
No,
we
no, no.
can.
Yeah.
I think we can respect like what other people want, and I think that's a big, big skill, especially in the creative industry, because they are seeking out individuals. They do want creative work. They do want a creative person, but you sometimes do have to control what comes out of your mouth and what you wear. Do you know what I mean? I put a shirt
Mm,
on today. I was naked a minute ago. So yeah, it's because I'm on a podcast. So, it is what
yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't think you'd want that on a Friday. Do you know what I mean? Crikey.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's sort of an interesting maybe topic to dig into. I mean, you of course you have a certain visual style that you are having. I think that maybe people that using the video version of this podcast, they can see it in the background,
Yeah.
and they can also see it in the website links and yeah, links we're going to put into the show notes for people to check out. I can definitely
Mhm.
recommend to check out the work from James. And but I think like what's interesting is that you have this identity, you have some, so from the outside it appears like some consistency with your work, but at the same time you have to deal with different client needs. Of course they choose maybe you to kind of to work with them, but at the same time maybe the needs are different, right? Maybe you have to design something that's way more soft than like what you
Yeah.
maybe usually do, or maybe something that's maybe more elegant than you usually do, or something that's more rough than you usually do it. How do you deal with that balance between sort of maybe something the sort of the needs of what the business actually, what would be best for the business and what would be best for the brand and their goals. And at the same time, maybe the reason why they actually got in touch with you in the first place, your maybe visual consistency and your own sort of flavor.
Yeah, it's a very interesting topic. Yeah, because like you say, they've seen my work, which is why they've reached out to me, and they like the way I work. But like you say, at the same time, every client is different. Every client has a different set of needs. Every client has a different audience. So these are all things that are always at the forefront whenever I'm kind of going through the creative process. So there's obviously, I mean, I don't niche, so I am niched within brand identity and logo design, but I don't just do logo design for the hospitality trade or just brewery companies or anything like that. I tend to, if you need a logo, whatever industry you're in, I'll do it. I'll smash it. That's kind of my thing. I think if you can do a logo for one industry, you can use those principles and mindsets and creativity to create for any other industry. So I think some people do niche themselves into a corner somewhat, but yeah, I'll design for anybody. But a lot of the golden nuggets and the ideas and the thoughts are heavily influenced by workshops at the beginning of the project. They're briefs that me and the client work out together, mood boards, so a client will come to me and they'll need a logo and it will have a job to do. That is always on my mind, but at the same time, they have come to me for how I think. So I can use my thinking style to execute something unique for them based on their needs. So what I've got to remember, although like my personal brand, my personal style, beard, classic designer look, do you know what I mean? Tattoos or whatever, I don't push that onto the creative. That's my personal brand. That's where the detachment is. My job is to create and use my mind to create them a brand identity and a logo that works for their audience. So there is an element of stripping back a style. So I wouldn't ever place my style on them, but they have, like I said, paid for the way I think and how I execute. So that style remains, but my loves are removed somewhat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I think there are a couple of interesting points here. I mean, like number one, I think you talk about the process, right? And systemizing the process. And I mean, if your process, like to your point of like being too vertical or being too niche, if you have defined a good process that always includes empathy, that always includes understanding the other side, right? Then you automatically you have that's sort of like part of your thinking. That's part of the process, right?
Yeah.
So that automatically gonna make sure you kind of like adjust your direction, right? And I think the other interesting thing is that you say, okay, well, maybe they come because what they can see from the craft side, but it's actually the thinking, right? That's sort of the thinking, then the process, the consistency is actually not the outcome.
But,
But
I don't personally think that, or the way I like to think is like clients don't come to me for a logo. They come to me for the way I think. Do you know what I mean? And I think I think a lot of creatives could actually understand their worth a bit more, and I think a lot of creatives undervalue themselves, especially logo designers, brand identity designers. They undervalue the work they do because they think they're just creating a logo, a thing, a particular, icon or type. That is what they're buying, but they're buying so much more than that. They're buying your brain, and that's where the money is. That's where all the gold is. So I always like to kind of like reframe it slightly. It's like, people, if a client comes to me and there's like, I want a logo, and it's like, yeah, that's great, but you're actually coming to me for my mind. That's what you're paying for. Anybody can execute a logo. You can go onto Fiverr and get a logo, but you can't get this brain on Fiverr. That's the kind of the difference. I don't know if you've got Fiverr over there, which is like a online.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's the kind of way I like to reframe it. And that's when you can start to get people to understand the value, 17 years, best-selling author on creativity, logo course, 250,000 followers on Instagram, like I said, 17 years in the industry, this is what people are buying. They're not buying a logo because they can go and buy that anywhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think this the strategic aspect. I think that is sort of like the underrated one, right? And I mean, it's tough if you still need to educate a client for that. I mean, right? I mean, in best case, they understand that's the reason why they work with you. That process.
It is
And
different. The most difficult thing is, like, for any creative, is getting your client to understand the value. That is, they're like, some people will come to me and they'll go, I'm always kind of like very open and transparent. So I was like, so what budget are we working to? I need to understand, like, you've come to me for brand identity, brand identity is so big. There's a lot of things in brand identity. Logo is one of those small things within brand identity. What can we achieve together? What kind of budget are we working with? And clients often have no idea, no idea what it costs, no idea the process, no idea how you get to the outcome. They just know they want a logo, and that's all they know. So trying to educate your clients, I think, is like one of the toughest things, is to get them to understand the power of what this thinking does for their brand. That's, trying to get them to understand the value is definitely one of the toughest things.
Yeah, it's the difference between the output and the outcome, right? You could say, right? The output might be just a logo, right? But the outcome might be completely different, right?
Yeah. The output is a logo,
and all that that requires that strategic process, right? And the impact is going to be different. I mean, it's two logos, but like one logo has been thinking a lot more about like what it actually creates on the other side, and how does that match the business, etc. So
but like you say as well, like the output is a logo, but the outcome could be multi-million-pound company in 3 years. You know what I mean? So is that getting people to understand that without this output, that outcome can't happen. Do you know what I mean? That is where we try. That's especially where I try and lead clients now, is, because I'm always quite intrigued. I ask a lot of questions, so where do you want your company to be in 3 to 5 years? Where do you want it to be in 10 years? And some of the answers are like, well, 10 million turnover, billion turnover. And I'm like, and you want to spend $1,000 on your logo, but you want to be making $1 billion. Have a grip, mate. The only way you're going to get there is with this solid brand identity. So let's try and figure out some numbers, shall we? Because that's what I think. People they don't place enough. I think people are starting to know. There are lots of clients who do understand the importance, the value of proper brand identity, proper strategy, proper marketing, proper advertising. But there are also many that don't. So it is quite interesting. It's one of the funniest things that I always, somebody says, I talk to them and they're like, oh yeah, I want to be turning over $1 million next year. Okay, so what's the budget? $100. And I'm like, no, get lost. See you later.
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's still I think a long way to go. And the other thing is that it may look so easy, it may look so visual, and it looks so but I think what people don't understand is that that experience to actually do that also efficient. And like you said, the process, right? You don't develop the process. You develop this process. You craft it over multiple years to get to the best results in the shortest amount of time. And so that's what people buy, right? And understanding that, I think, And I think referring to like what their outcome is and how does that connect again to the budget they want to invest into design kind of makes sense as well. I think that's also a very practical maybe takeaway for the audience to think a little bit about that as well. Like what is your audience actually intending with their goals, and how does that match with what they want to
Yeah.
invest into the project? And and I think like one of the best things is always to think about how could your project contribute to these goals, right?
Mhm.
So I think like a really good way to sell design is to actually and talk about the business benefits of having a, like one of the topics that's big on this podcast, of course, user experience design, right?
Mhm.
Digital product design, like what are the business benefits of actually making it a great customer experience?
Mhm.
If you have these big goals as a business, then you should also invest into making this a good customer experience, because otherwise you're not going to get there. Same with
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
logo. Same with the logo, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
I think what is also maybe interesting is if you focus on a logo with a project, then maybe there's already an identity in place, right? There's already a corporate identity in place. Sometimes maybe, I don't know, sometimes you actually have the ability to work also and change the corporate identity based out of the logo. But how do you, if you focus on the logo and sort of there is maybe already some either visual biases from the corporate identity that they maybe give you, or there is maybe a bias also from their subjective one, just from what they have in mind. And how do you kind of educate the client towards maybe almost auditing it, maybe if you want to maybe get more creative freedom with what you want to do based out of the friction that may come into the process in the beginning, either to their subjective assumptions and
Yeah.
maybe ideas, or maybe sort of the corporate identity that is maybe already in place when you focus on the logo.
Yeah, I mean, that's another good question. I mean, I would classify that as redesign. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm,
there
mhm.
are a lot of people who will come to me and they will already they've been running for 10 years. They might have been running for 3 years, 20 years, or whatever it is. And yeah, they'll have a very established emotional tie to what they've got. So that is not always easy to break. That is not always easy to separate somebody from. This logo has got me to where I am now. I love it. It's my thing. And if they kind of say stuff like this, I'm like, well, why am I here? Firstly, if you love it,
Yeah.
why change it? And it's actually more about trying to get them to understand that the reason that I am there is because there is something wrong. So that's
Mhm.
kind of like the first hurdle to get through. And then it's about, I mean, a lot of the time, technology has moved like at a crazy speed. It moves quicker than anything else. Devices, applications, it's all moving so quickly. So you think of a company who started 20, 30 years ago, they are very much, their logo was built for a very different world, a world that
Mhm,
wasn't
mhm.
so online. Maybe it had a website if you're lucky, but probably not. So when I'm working with some quite older established brands, yes, there is that personal time, but there's also an understanding that to survive another 30 years, they need to start making changes. They need to have a responsive logo. They need to adapt. They need to think of smaller sizes. So I think that's kind of like I said, you're never going to get somebody to break. It's like, you can't get somebody to break up with their wife. Do you know what I mean? They love it. They love their wife. Sometimes you just got to say, well, what happens if your wife was wearing makeup today? Do you know what I mean? How can we spruce her up a little bit? So obviously there's loads of things you can kind of do to kind of balance that energy of like, I don't want to change it, I love it, to, well, these are the things we need to do. You can kind of prove how it doesn't work in certain places. And that often, you could do something as simple as like just getting their old logo, which isn't responsive, putting it on a social media profile image, tell them, see if they can read it, show them this is what
Mhm,
everybody
mhm,
else is
mhm.
seeing. And I think there are great ways that you can kind of provide that immediate kind of realization that we need to change here. But also, like, there are also things you don't, for example, have to, I think the best redesigns are more evolutions, so if you look at Disney, if you look at someone like the other, like Coca-Cola, some of the biggest brands, they haven't ever ripped everything up and started again. They've evolved and they've worked on how something can respond in certain situations, whether it be adaptability to size or product or whatever it is. So whenever I am doing a redesign, I'm always very wary of history. And I think history is very important because history gets people, that's what people remember. People love that. And so that's where the emotional attachment is. It's the history. So are there things that we can retain? Can we retain colors? Yes, it's a script or a handwritten or a typographical logo. Is there a way that we can just smarten that up so it works at smaller sizes? Can we add a symbol to that same style type? There are certain, just because you're redesigning doesn't mean you're redoing. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's a lot of, sometimes a lot of confusion there is and that's also a great way, like you were mentioning, to get clients on board. I understand the history. I understand what you've done to get this company to where it is, but what we need to do now, and the reason I'm here, is because we want to be lasting another 30 years. So what are the things we need to do? And you kind of break down, what the things we need to achieve. Well, yeah, we're definitely going to be looking to go more online and get into social media more. Okay, so these are the formats the logo needs to work. It doesn't do that at the moment. We can keep colors. You can keep, like I said, like brand. We think of the word brand is huge. Brand identity is a small part of that. Logo is an even smaller part of that. So the way they talk to people doesn't have to change. The way that they share information doesn't have to change, but maybe the way that we visualize that can change. Do you know what I mean? So they can retain so much and actually change a little bit to make real headway. I would suggest anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super interesting. I mean, I think it's so good to look at the history. And I think we can learn a lot if we're digging into that topic for a little bit. You are mentioning Disney and Coca-Cola, some great examples for how actually a very mature brand, even in these days, where there's a lot of simplification happening, oversimplification in many ways, they really sustain their identity, I think, with everything they have been doing. Even Disney moving more into the digital space, have been sort of keeping that with Disney Plus, etc. I think it's very interesting. Then on the flip side, you have sort of I don't know if there's a term for it, but the Helveticization, basically. So basically, all logos becoming basically using some form of Helvetica, maybe a different type, but if you look at multiple logos, for example, Airbnb, for example, being one. Airbnb, I think, still has a really strong identity. I think we're to do with the logo, but I think the way they use the font, the font. But there are many other examples that better than me that have been in recent years becoming very flat, very, very much Helvetica. You can see this with the automotive brands as well, as they're moving more into digital. They have been all removing a lot of their identity.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that? Is it a fact that brands go digital? How do you feel about that overall trend that you can maybe see there? Because I feel like specifically the strong identity, you can see it with some of the logos that are behind you, can really help specifically in an early point, right? To get a strong identity that people actually remember, right? And actually it has maybe it needs to have more identity in the beginning, and then maybe it has to be more sort of accessible maybe in the long run. That's why some of these brands moving in this direction. Maybe you can shine some light in terms of what do you see and how do you feel about that overall?
Well, how the world's moving logo wise.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, like I think they did go through a stage of like there was a lazy branding, lazy brand identity. I think like you call it the Helveticization or whatever it was.
Yeah.
If you look at something like Facebook, for example, or you know, I don't know, there's many other examples, but just an F, Google, yes, they're so iconic now that I don't think it even matters. It's more about their product than their logo, and obviously now Meta, and all the rest of it. But I think there was a stage where it got very lazy, and it was just purely, we've got so much money that it doesn't really matter. Possibly, I don't know, but I think when it comes to the digital world, like you say, people have got this kind of perception that every logo has to be clean, every logo has to be minimal, every logo has to be simple. But the problem with that is that every logo designer and every company has gone clean, minimal, and simple, and they all look the same. So there's very little differentiation. You could put 4 or 5 logos together and not really get any emotion, any feel, there's no memorability to them. You could show me 5, take them off the screen, and I wouldn't be able to name them again. Do you know what I mean? So I understand like why that was initially. A lot of designers are still like, well, a logo has to work as a favicon, which is obviously like the little 16 by 16 pixel that's turd as well. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to work in a favicon. It's just somebody's.
That's not how you start. You don't start.
Well, exactly. You don't start on a 16 by 16p. I mean, it's all rubbish. Well, what's happened is somebody's read that by some expert online, and then that gets social media'd, and everybody suddenly thinks that there's some sort of educated guru on design because they read it from somebody else. But I think what this conversation does, I'd imagine, like, let's talk about like a decade ago. The screens were still good, but they weren't the high resolution that they are now. Logos were going a lot smaller 10, 15 years ago, and there was a need for simplicity because there was this over energized urge that everything has to work small. But now everything's, like phones aren't doing this anymore. They're doing this again. Do you know what I mean? Some people's phones are bigger than the iPad mini I had, back 15 years ago or whatever it was. So, size, I think there is a minimal size, but I like to think of them more as shapes. So whenever I'm designing a logo, I think of like squares and I think of circles. I don't think of small and minimal. I think of like, how will this work in a square? How will this work in a circle? Because if you think of favicons or social media profiles or Twitter profiles or LinkedIn profiles or whatever, headers on your website, yada, yada, yada. You're often talking that a logo needs to fit somewhere in a shape like this. Obviously, if it's super detailed, and you're going for like crazy illustration, crazy detail, the more you're going to shrink it down, the more it's not going to work. But we're kind of going off point here. But I suppose when it comes to design, I think now with how clear and how, ultra HD, 4K, 5K screens, these things are high quality, super high quality, and things look absolutely epic small. And I often think like, if you can read copy on a website, your logo is going to be 10 times the size of copy on a website. So why worry so much about the size of a logo? You should be worrying more about the size of the type on your website, for example, or the copy. But I suppose when it kind of comes to, what does that mean? I think what, and something that I've learned from working with, like, say, over 800 clients in the last 7 or 8 years, is that people are looking to stand out. Putting an F, in a blue box will not make you stand out now. People are looking for, people are looking to be slightly different, and people are looking to, I mean, it's not that it was easy, but 20 years ago, if you had enough money, you could be seen everywhere. Now, you don't need to have a lot of money to be seen everywhere. So the competition has risen so much because of reach, thanks to things like Instagram, Pinterest, all these other bits and pieces. So what people are wanting is like, how can people remember me? Which is why some people go like super risky. Do you know what I mean? Some people like push the boundaries purely to shock people, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're remembering me for the wrong reasons. It just matters that you're remembering me. So yeah. So I think memorability. I think people want to stand out. Everybody's Instagram are stealing everything from TikTok at the moment. Instagram is now basically TikTok, and all you've got is people dancing on camera to music. That was great when that first person did it and blew up, went absolutely mad, absolutely viral. Now, every twat is dancing on TikTok and Instagram, and everybody looks the same. Do you know what I mean? So what's different? That's what people are looking for. They're looking for what's next, what's different, And I think clever logo design can do that with a bit of narrative. Do you know what I mean? Rather than just simple stuff. Do you know what I mean? So
that's a really good point, and I think this is connecting to a lot of things in design. I think that this urge to stand out, that urge to provoke, because the world is becoming so noisy. Essentially, you need to push the boundaries, and you need to be provocative, maybe, and some choose that path. If you look at if you take an example, the Tesla pickup exterior design, for example, right? This is a provocation. If you think about like traditional exterior design of cars, if you think about, I think like a lot of people say like, okay, there is no negative press. Press is press. The positive or negative, right? In these days, in terms of marketing, right? That's
all press is good press. Yeah,
you could connect to that, maybe to some of the things with Trump, maybe, right? So I think it's kind of interesting, kind of the current.
You look at any, for example, like you were just saying, like all press is good press. I mean, to an extent, I mean, depending on what you do, but if you're in front of people, like take Trump, for example, whether you agree with him or don't agree with him, I personally don't, but airtime, on camera all the time, in all the tabloids, that's only making his brand do this. Do you know what I mean? Depending on what he's done. Do you know what I mean? But, I think I think there is a fine line between, good press and bad press, because bad press can kill some people. Do you know what I mean? But
sure, yeah.
I think like the point is that it is about being. It's not necessarily about being the best. It's sometimes just being the loudest.
Iconic. You could say iconic as well. But I think and I think specifically, for young brands, for young companies, it's important to be iconic to really stand out, right? Especially if you're going to sort of like a red market, sort of busy market where you're trying to enter, like, let's say you have a software company, you're doing a solution that, other companies are also doing. So how are you standing out? And not by having the same logo than the others, right? So I think it's an important element. Something that you can actually control yourself, right, as a company. And a lot of other things on the product are maybe due to user needs and functional needs, etc. But that's something you can really control.
Yeah.
You talked a lot about process. I think if we looking into the process here of James Martin, basically, sort of like all of your learnings, basically, that you gained all of years. How does a good process, if you would guide the audience a little bit, what do you learn? Like, what is a good? Of course, you would like to talk 10 hours now to talk about the good process. But if you give us a 5-minute version of it, a 3-minute version of it, what does a good process contain from your perspective? Maybe pointing out things that people usually forget to include.
Yeah. Well, so I'll start off by kind of dropping this in there that there's a big difference between client experience and client process. Um, Client process is getting somebody to a desired endpoint, I would suggest, and the client experience is how much do they enjoy that process, or how did that process make them feel? Because a good people will forget a product, but they'll remember an experience. So I think this is something that a lot of creators or creatives or designers or anybody listening should really think about is how fun, how easy, how am I making the client feel? Because if I'm making them feel good all the time and they're enjoying it, they're very much likely to remember me more than the logo I've done for them. So that's something that I always think about is how can I make that experience, always being on time for calls, always being positive on emails, always delivering stuff on time, always reaching back out to them and saying hi even when I finish the project, all of these things really up the client experience. And what that does, obviously, is it makes people come back, makes people refer you. It's much easier to keep a client than it is to find a new one. And if you've got a load of clients,
that's a good point. Yeah.
If you've got a load of clients, finding you and have friends who are pointing people in your direction, you're on to a winner. So that's something that I just wanted to add in before I forgot, was the importance of client experience within your process. Because I think it's such an important thing, an important asset to a designer. If you can give that experience, you're onto a winner. But that comes through process, weirdly enough, because if you've got no process, you're fumbling around, you're late to everything, you can't create any ideas, they're not going to have a good experience. Do you know what I mean? So when it comes to, obviously I can talk about my brand identity process, client process. So obviously after they've been onboarded, so after they've agreed my terms, agreed to the price, agreed to the way I work. So everything always starts with a call. So like a Zoom call where we will chat about objectives, what we need to achieve. We'll go into a little bit of, I wouldn't say it's not like a strategy call, but it is, the what's, the hows, the whys, trying to understand the kind of nitty gritty of why they do what they do, who they do it for, the audience, what is it they do, what the services they provide, how do they help people, understanding these questions are, really important for me to be able to do the job that I do. So I also send them what I would classify as like a brief questionnaire. So before we jump on the call, I've got a pretty good understanding of what it is they do, who they do it for, where the logo needs to be applied and all that kind of stuff. And then I also ask for a mood board, and that can either be Notion, Pinterest, Milano, whatever it is. Some people just send me a Google Doc or whatever, and it just helps me understand the visual personality of maybe some of their past brands, how it's evolved, what logos they like, who are their competitors, and all that kind of stuff. So after the call, and after we've discussed all of that, I then go into a sketch phase. So I like to kind of call that like rapid prototyping, where, so sorry, there's a step before that. So just before that, obviously I've got the brief and I'm breaking that brief down. I'm word mapping. So that's basically, I'm trying to dissect all the information from the call, all the information from their brief. And I'm trying to break down the golden nuggets of what are the things I can visualize. What are they're talking about being honest and impactful and creative. How can I visualize these things within a brand identity? So these are all the kind of bits and pieces I'm doing when I'm breaking down the design brief and breaking down my kind of ideas into words. Once I've kind of got a good group of words that I think I can start to think about. I then go into like the rapid prototyping stage, which is just lots of random sketches, super quick, no real thought, just like, okay, how can I visualize X? How can I show Y? How can I, if they're like a product based or service based, how can I emote the right feelings? If they're looking to be kind and soft and approachable, what are the things that emulate that? If I was trying to do something soft and approachable, I wouldn't be doing any kind of sharp, jaggedy lines. Do you know what I mean? Or if I was, I'd probably be doing more circular shapes and smooth flowing shapes, if I want to emote that softness. So yeah, basically after that, I then go into like a defining and refining my idea phase. So there's always like one idea from my sketch process that I think ticks all the boxes. So I get that up, vector it up, then I start to show it working on in what I would classify as real world mock-ups, So if I'm doing work for a cafe, I'll be showing it working on signage, menus, cups, apparel, takeaway bits and pieces, anything that can help me build a picture for the client. And then obviously I present everything. And the reason I kind of like to go like full ass into like one idea rather than kind of half-ass a load of ideas is kind of purely because it allows me to sell the concept. A client has come to me with a problem. It's my job to find a solution. Yes, there are feedback. If they don't like what I present, there are processes like revision processes and all the rest of it. But, I like to it's really difficult to come up with one good idea, let alone 5 good ideas. So, and because the way I like to create my work is through a lot of storytelling, narrative, like adding journey and personality, like leaning into one epic design, I find is very effective, especially for me and my clients. It works every time. Every logo you've seen of mine has been done with this process. So, and every logo that everybody goes to see on Made by James or on my website has been done with this process. And it has never failed me because it allows me to have real focus and clarity. And I think the really important thing to kind of mention here is my process works for me, but it won't work for everybody. Do you know what I mean? And there are 1,000 ways to create a logo. Some people share sketches first. Some people share 3 or 4 concepts. I know people like me who share one concept finished. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's the beauty of design is it doesn't matter how you get to the outcome. It's whether the outcome is good. That's the only important thing. Does it do a job? Is it effective? Does it work for the audience? I like to think about like, do I like it? My theory is if I kind of like to think that I'm in, this is my brand. If I'm doing a design for any other company, I'm thinking this is my company. I treat them like they're my own. I'm like, does it look good? I think I've got a pretty good, reputation within the design world now that I think if I think it looks good, I know other people will think it looks good. Yeah. So that's the kind of way I like to kind of roll is like there's, I think as long as it does an effective job, it doesn't matter how you get there, as long as you get there. And ultimately, like for example, like Instagram, social media is so funny. You know what I mean? Like I can put out a design and somebody will go, oh, I don't really like it. And I go, don't really care. You're not my client. They've paid me. Do you know what I mean? So you're not the audience, it's not yours. It doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It's whether it does a job, which it does. So quite interesting.
100%. And thinking about the audience, I think is key, right? Like you said in the very end, like, yeah, maybe you don't like it, but you're not the audience, right? So
yeah,
like focusing on the audience with everything that you sort of judge in terms of design totally makes sense because otherwise we'll never understand how did you actually came there with in terms of the process. So yeah, and I think I totally agree with what you said. Like the process is really different to like it maybe is similar and the same and on sort of the big the big theme of things, yeah, but in
Yeah.
sort of like the way you kind of like this client experience that you actually like the way you call it is connected to the way you design, is connected to how you communicate, how you kind of like work in terms of the rhythm, and depending on a lot of different things. So everyone, and I think like I think there's a quote around like, if you know the rules, you know how to break them, right? So
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
so essentially, I think this requires a certain design maturity to, and that's just, I think, a problem a lot of juniors have is that they Google process and then they try to force this process to a project where it maybe doesn't make sense, right? To have
Yeah.
to for your client base or what the context is. So being able to understand what the process and then being able to kind of make it work for you, I think, right? And
Yeah, I think dropping like I think there's a lot of ego when it comes to design. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. When I was a lot younger, I used to think I was right all the time, and a lot of younger, fresher designers will go through that. A client will go, I don't really like it," and they'll go, "Well, I'm the designer and you're not." Do you know what I mean? And I think dropping the ego is such a big thing for designers because yes, although we are there to create and come up with ideas and execute a brief for our client, you have to remember that your client's happiness is just as important. Do you know what I mean? So obviously, if they're asking for something stupid, you know, don't do it. Explain to them, but don't just say no. Just explain to them why not. Do you know what I mean? If they're
that's
like, well,
key. That's key. Yeah.
yeah, if I want it to be pink because my daughter likes it. Well, then you say, well, shouldn't she be on the next meeting then? Do you know what I mean? So, I think what you've got to do is you have to listen to your clients, because ultimately, if you can make them happy, I've kind of gone through like design processes and design stages where I'm not overly enamored with the final outcome, but it's done a great job for them. They're really happy. Their audience really like it / don't really care. Do you know what I mean? The product's good and all the rest of it. But even though what I did and I executed it, the execution was great. For me, I was like, I personally don't like it, but I wasn't their audience. I wasn't their audience.
But you understand it. You can abstract it basically and understand like why the need's there for the audience, I think, right?
Exactly, yeah. And I think
structured
dropping
basis.
like not everything that leaves your desk and leaves your studio, you are going to love. And I think when you understand that, design becomes a much easier commodity. Do you know what I
The
mean?
issue there is also detaching yourself from the design, right? I think like as
Yeah, I
designers,
think
we got the
that
design, especially as a young designer, you have it under your arm. You like it's part of you, right? And then like if someone criticizes it, it's like someone is hurting you, but actually it's just you and the design are two different things. This sounds kind of straightforward, but it's actually educational. It's kind
yeah.
of something people have to learn, and
Yeah, and you learn by being wrong, ultimately. Yeah.
yeah. All right. So, James, how can people get in touch with you? What would be the best way if they have more questions about your design process?
Well, you can find me at made.by.james on Instagram, on Pinterest. The beauty of it is now, I've been around for a while, that if you just type in Made by James into Google, you'll find me. My bearded face will pop up somewhere. But the madebyjames.com. Yeah, and Made by James online. I answer every comment, every DM, every question. So if you've got any others, come find me.
Cool. Awesome. So you're going to find the links also in the show notes. So James, thank you so much for sharing all of these insights, really digging deep into brand design and sort of like getting some insights from all of the experience and learnings you made. So really would like to thank you in regards of the audience for your time.
Yeah, it's been great fun. We haven't even touched the surface, so I think we'll have to do a version 2 early next year.
Yeah, sure. Let's plan it. Alright, there was the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments about your thoughts and biggest learnings from the episode. I'm always super curious about that. You can also tag me in a post about your biggest takeaway and share your insights with others to pass on your learnings. If the episode provided you a lot of value, make sure to follow, subscribe, and share it with friends and colleagues so they also have the chance to learn and grow. Until next time, cheers.